The arena pulsed with electricity, every spotlight slicing through the smoky air as thousands of fans screamed, chanted, and pounded their fists against the barriers. Cameras hovered overhead like mechanical hawks, drinking in every angle of the moment. At the center of the octagon stood Damon the Titan Cruz, the undefeated, loud-mouthed UFC champion whose ego was almost as heavy as the championship belt around his waist. Damon paced across the mat with theatrical swagger, microphone gripped in one hand, the other raised to hush the roaring crowd. Sweat glistened across his sculpted frame, but his grin was relaxed, cocky, confident, unshaken. "I've beaten every fighter on this roster," he thundered, his voice echoing through the arena like a declaration from a king addressing peasants. The crowd erupted again, half cheering, half booing, but he didn't care. Damon thrived on the noise. He fed on it. He lifted his chin, eyes burning with challenge. "But there's one old legend people keep talking about," he paused, letting suspense fill the air. "Chuck Norris." A wave of murmurs rippled through the arena. Commentators shifted in their seats. A camera zoomed in on Damon's face as he smirked with pure arrogance. "Chuck, if you're watching," he leaned toward the lens, "I'll knock you out in the first round. Grandpa time is over." The entire arena gasped. One commentator slapped his headset and whispered, "Oh no, he didn't just say that." The crowd reacted instantly, some shocked, some laughing, some booing as Damon strutted proudly across the cage like a lion marking territory. The Titan lifted his arms, basking in the reaction. But far from the spotlight, in the dimly lit first row, sat a quiet man in a simple denim jacket. No entourage, no security, no flash. He didn't move when Damon spoke his name. He didn't even blink. He simply lifted his sunglasses with one finger, revealing calm, focused eyes that had seen decades of battles, on screen, off screen, and in real life. Those eyes belonged to Chuck Norris. And the look he gave wasn't anger. It wasn't annoyance. It was worse. It was the expression of a man who had already decided something. A man who had just been called out. And had every intention of answering. Backstage was buzzing like a beehive, crew members rushing with clipboards, stage lights being wheeled across the hall, reporters adjusting their microphones, and fans pressing against the velvet barriers hoping to catch a glimpse of the champion. And right in the middle of all this chaos strutted Damon, the Titan Cruz, basking in his own spotlight. Cameras followed him like obedient pets as he swept through the corridor with sunglasses on indoors and a grin so wide it practically glowed. "Chuck Norris," he scoffed loudly, cracking his knuckles for emphasis. "Please. I'm the king now." He flexed toward a camera, veins bulging in his arms. "You saw what I did in there. There isn't a man alive who can survive my first round." His entourage laughed on cue, hyping him up like background actors. Damon loved every second. He thrived on attention the way a fire thrives on oxygen, uncontrolled, blazing, hungry. But not everyone backstage was applauding. Two reporters nearby exchanged troubled glances. "Does he not know Chuck is here today?" one whispered behind her notepad. "No idea," the other murmured. "He's sitting with the commissioners. Front row. He heard everything." A makeup artist paused mid-brushstroke, listening. A production assistant's eyes widened. Even an intern carrying towels slowed to a stop. Damon's words were echoing down the hallway like a challenge nobody in their right mind would issue. But Damon didn't care. His arrogance was louder than the crowd itself, drowning out warnings, whispers, common sense, everything. He strutted toward the private locker room area, bragging to his team about future fights, bigger belts, and global fame. "They should thank me for calling him out," he boasted. "I'm giving that old guy relevance. Who even remembers his last fight?" Someone did remember. Someone just around the corner. A nervous staff member, barely older than 20, approached him as if walking into a lion's cage. Mr. Cruz," he stammered, clutching a clipboard so tight his knuckles went white. "Yes, sir, someone wants to speak with you." Damon removed his sunglasses dramatically, smirking. "Oh yeah, another sponsor. A fan. Tell them they can wait. The champ has priorities." The staff member swallowed hard. I really think you'll want to take this one." Damon rolled his eyes, waving dismissively. Fine. Bring them over. I've got 30 seconds." "No, sir," the staff member whispered, stepping aside. "They're already here." Damon turned, and the cocky smile evaporated from his face. Leaning casually against a metal support pillar, arms crossed, stood a man who carried more presence in silence than Damon did in 100 press conferences. Denim jacket. Calm expression. Eyes sharp enough to slice stone. Chuck Norris. He wasn't flanked by security or assistants. He wasn't surrounded by cameras. He didn't need an entourage. He stood there like a storm waiting to be acknowledged. Every conversation in the hallway died instantly. Cameras lowered. Even Damon's entourage backed away a few inches, unsure if they should stay or run for cover. Chuck didn't move, didn't blink, didn't smile. He simply said, in a voice calm enough to freeze blood, "I heard you were looking for me." Damon's throat tightened. His bravado cracked. He stepped back without meaning to, suddenly aware of just how loud his mouth had been, and just how close the legend now stood. For the first time tonight, the undefeated champion had no words. Because Chuck Norris wasn't a meme, wasn't a joke, and wasn't amused. He was the lesson Damon didn't know he was about to learn. For a moment, the entire hallway held its breath. The hum of generators, the chatter of reporters, the clatter of equipment, all of it faded beneath the weight of two men standing face to face, the undefeated champion and the undefeated legend. Chuck Norris gave a small, calm smile. Not mocking, not threatening, just knowing. "I heard you're looking for me." The words were soft, but they carried through the hallway like a thunderclap. Damon blinked, startled by how controlled and unshaken Chuck sounded. Then, as if reminding himself who he was, Damon puffed out his chest and let out a loud, forced laugh. "Oh man, this is great." He clapped his hands. "Old man, don't injure yourself trying to keep up." People nearby winced visibly. One cameraman whispered, "He really doesn't know what he's doing." Another staffer shook her head, muttering, "God help him." But Chuck. He didn't flinch. His calm remained unbroken, like an ancient mountain weathered by storms. "I don't fight for ego," Chuck said quietly. "Never have." He took a step closer, his presence alone tightening the air. "I fight to teach lessons." The words hit harder than a punch. Damon felt something twist, annoyance, insecurity, pride, all crashing together. He rolled his eyes, trying to brush it off. "Oh, please," Damon scoffed, waving the idea away with a dramatic flourish. "Spare me the fortune cookie wisdom. If you want to teach me a lesson, fine, teach me from the floor of the octagon." He leaned forward, smirking arrogantly. "Sign the contract, then. First round knockout. I'll retire you permanently." Chuck's expression remained exactly the same, peaceful, which somehow made it scarier. "All right," Chuck said. "Let's give the world a show." A gasp rippled through the hall. A reporter nearly dropped her tablet. Damon's entourage exchanged nervous glances, suddenly unsure if their hype man routine had led him straight off a cliff. The UFC event coordinator, who had been silently watching from the corner, stepped forward with wide eyes. "Mr. Norris, Mr. Cruz, are you serious? A sanctioned fight? Tonight?" Chuck nodded once. Damon slapped the coordinator on the shoulder. "You heard the man. Draw it up. I'm about to make history." But Chuck wasn't looking at the coordinator or the cameras. He was looking only at Damon. "You're fast," Chuck said. "Strong. I respect skill. But you lack something far more important." Damon snorted. "Yeah, what's that?" "Gray hair." Chuck's gaze sharpened just a fraction. "Discipline." The single word sliced straight through the noise. Damon stiffened, irritation flaring. "No, old-timer. What I have is dominance. I didn't climb to the top by being disciplined. I climbed by destroying anyone who dared stand across from me." Chuck tilted his head slightly. "And yet here you are, threatened by a man you call old." Those around them reacted with quiet shock. Damon's nostrils flared. His fists clenched involuntarily. "I'm not threatened," Damon snarled. "I'm annoyed that you still think you belong in my arena." Chuck's voice softened even more, dangerously so. "I don't belong in your arena," Damon. You belong in mine. A chill rolled down the hallway. Damon swallowed hard, but forced a smile anyway. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing every second. Fine, Damon barked. You talk a big game. Let's settle it in front of a global audience. Chuck nodded again. Good. The world could use a reminder. Damon laughed, trying to shake the unease creeping up his spine. You're gonna regret this. I'm ending this in the first round. Chuck simply answered, We'll see. The coordinator, trembling with both excitement and fear, rushed off to finalize the paperwork. Reporters scrambled for front-row access. Damon's team exploded with false confidence, slapping his shoulders, shouting, You got this! Even though their eyes hinted otherwise. But Chuck did none of that. He just turned, calmly walking away like a man who had already accepted the outcome. A man who didn't need to hype himself, or threaten, or boast. A man who knew exactly what he was capable of. Damon watched him leave, forcing a grin. But underneath, a single flicker of doubt formed. And for the first time in his career, Damon Cruz wondered if he had just provoked the wrong man. The announcement hit the stadium like a hurricane. A roar surged across the arena. One part disbelief, one part excitement, one part fear for the man who had just signed a contract with an icon. Fans jumped from their seats, waving signs, recording on their phones, shouting theories and predictions. Social media exploded instantly, hashtags climbing worldwide before Chuck even reached the cage. The lights dimmed. Smoke rolled over the stage. The giant screens flickered with dramatic graphics. Special exhibition bout, Damon the Titan Cruz versus Chuck Norris. The crowd went feral. Some cheered. Some laughed in shock. Others murmured prayers, mostly for Damon. Then, the entrance music cut. The arena dropped into a tense, drum-like heartbeat sound. And through the shadows, Chuck Norris stepped out. He didn't pose. He didn't point. He didn't even smile. He walked forward with the unshakable calm of someone who had stood across from danger far greater than an MMA cage. His quiet presence carried more power than any spotlight could ever give. Every step he took seemed intentional, grounded, rooted in a lifetime of discipline. He wore no flashy attire, just simple shorts, taped wrists, and an expression that said he wasn't here to entertain ego. He was here to demonstrate something deeper. He doesn't need a show, one commentator whispered. The show follows him. The crowd watched in reverent silence as Chuck climbed into the cage, moving with surprising ease for a man Damon had mocked for his age. He didn't even acknowledge the audience. He simply walked to his corner and sat cross-legged for a moment, eyes closed, breathing deeply. Meditative. Present. Still. If the cage had been a storm, Chuck was the eye at its center. But then, Damon Cruz's entrance shattered the calm like a grenade. Heavy bass. Fire blasts. Flashing lights. His name across every screen in violent red letters, the Titan. He strutted out flexing, pounding his chest, screaming at fans, acting like he had already won. Two coaches followed, one shouting trash talk toward Chuck's corner. Damon pointed at Chuck from the ramp. You're about to be history, he yelled, voice dripping with venomous bravado. The crowd booed, but Damon embraced it like fuel. He strutted into the cage, circling Chuck like a lion circling prey. I'm gonna send you back to the 80s, old man, he taunted. Hope you stretched those dusty bones. Chuck didn't respond. Instead, he slowly stood, rolled his shoulders, and began stretching, smooth, controlled movements that looked almost too soft, too gentle for a cage fight. A commentator leaned forward, gripping his headset. I don't think Damon understands the situation he's in. The other replied, he thinks he's fighting a celebrity. He's actually fighting a lifetime martial artist who's forgotten more techniques than Damon's learned. Inside the arena, anticipation tightened like a fist around every spectator's chest. The referee approached them in the center. Damon bounced on his toes, throwing shadow punches an inch from Chuck's face, trying to provoke a reaction. Chuck didn't even blink. His eyes remained steady, calm, assessing. Studying Damon the way a seasoned master studies a student's worst habits. The referee held out his arms. Gentlemen, this is a sanctioned exhibition bout. Keep it clean. Damon cut him off. Oh, it'll be quick, trust me. Chuck offered a small nod. Focus, Damon. This isn't the time for pride. Damon scoffed loudly. You'll be unconscious before the pride leaves my mouth. The referee stepped back, clearly sensing the tension but unaware of the vast difference in mindset between the two fighters. Chuck moved to his corner, grabbed his mouthguard calmly, and placed it with thoughtful precision. Damon slammed his fists into the mat, hyping up the crowd one last time. All around the arena, fans leaned forward, breath held. Backstage, fighters gathered around monitors, watching with wide eyes. Commentators whispered like narrators in a war movie. You can feel the energy shift, one said quietly. This doesn't feel like Damon's usual fight. This feels like something else. The camera zoomed in on Damon, sweat glistening, muscles tense, stare hard. He looked hungry. Then it cut to Chuck. He looked peaceful, as though the outcome was already decided in his mind. The lights flickered dramatically. The announcer's voice boomed through the arena. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready? The crowd exploded, shaking the walls. Chuck lowered his stance. Damon cracked his neck. The cage door slammed shut with a metallic finality that made millions watching at home feel the same chill. There was no turning back. Not for Damon. Not for Chuck. Not for the lesson about to unfold. The arena lights tightened into a white-hot ring around the cage. The referee raised his hand, looked at both fighters, and signaled the start. Ding! The bell rang. Damon exploded forward instantly. No hesitation, no patience, just raw aggression. He swung a looping right hand with enough force to drop a heavyweight. But Chuck wasn't there. He slipped under the punch with a subtle tilt of his head, moving so smoothly it looked like the air itself had guided him. Damon's fist sliced through nothing but space. The crowd gasped. Damon spun, swinging again, wild, fast, powerful. A punch meant to knock out a bull. Chuck was already out of its path. No wasted motion. No panic. Just pure, practiced calm. Damon's third punch followed, desperate to land even a touch. He missed again. The commentators were already losing their minds. Is Chuck Norris actually faster than Damon right now? This doesn't make sense. Damon's one of the quickest strikers in the UFC. Damon, red with frustration, charged a fourth time. His footsteps thudded loudly, his breaths heavy, his confidence eroding with each failed strike. Chuck leaned in close as Damon whiffed past him and whispered, "Slow down." The entire arena shivered. Before Damon could react, Chuck delivered a single precise counterstrike. Not a knockout blow. Not a punishment. Just a perfectly timed, expertly placed touch of controlled power. It connected. Damon stumbled backward, eyes wide, legs unsteady. For the first time in his career, he felt genuinely confused. The crowd erupted in a roar so loud it rattled the rafters. The commentators screamed, "Oh, Chuck still has it. He barely touched him. That was technique, not force, my God." Damon shook his head like a man trying to clear fog. "Lucky shot," he barked, though his voice cracked. He rushed forward again, this time with panic instead of pride. His punches were no longer calculated. They were frantic, sloppy, desperate attempts to regain control. Chuck didn't meet the aggression. He guided it. Damon threw a jab. Chuck redirected it with a gentle parry. Damon swung a hook. Chuck leaned back, letting it pass like a breeze. Damon tried a knee. Chuck pivoted smoothly, placing a hand on Damon's waist to steady him, not mocking, but stopping him from falling over his own momentum. It was humiliating in the softest, most devastating way. Damon, panting, sweating, angry, swung again. Chuck stepped aside and lightly tapped Damon's shoulder with 2 fingers, just a soft, subtle thunk. A warning. A message. A statement. The crowd froze. Damon froze. Commentators whispered like witnesses of a supernatural event. What is happening right now? He's not even hitting him. He's teaching him. This is a clinic. Damon is being outclassed in fundamentals. Damon backed away, chest heaving, eyes wide with something he had never felt in the octagon before. Fear. Not of being hurt, but of being exposed. Chuck's breathing was calm, steady, controlled, like a man on a morning walk. Not a hint of strain. Not a flicker of anger. Only patience. Damon lifted his fists again, but they trembled slightly. Chuck walked toward him slowly, not aggressively, more like an instructor approaching a frustrated student. "Your power is real," Chuck said quietly. "But your mind is chaotic." Damon swung again, sloppy, telegraphed, desperate. Chuck caught the punch with an open palm. Gasps exploded across the arena. Then, with the gentlest twist, Chuck guided Damon's arm away and tapped his chest, sending him off balance again. Damon stumbled to the side, slamming into the cage wall with a look of raw disbelief. How are you doing this?" he muttered. Chuck didn't answer. He simply raised his hands into a relaxed stance, classic, timeless, flawless. No showboating. No taunting. Just mastery. Damon steadied himself, anger overtaking reason. "You think you're better than me?" he roared, lunging forward with another reckless charge. Chuck sidestepped, let Damon fly past him, and with a single feather-light push between the shoulder blades, sent Damon stumbling face-first into the canvas. The crowd erupted. Some cheered. Some screamed. Many simply stared, stunned. Damon scrambled up, cheeks burning with humiliation. He looked at Chuck as if realizing, for the first time, that this wasn't a celebrity cameo. This was a martial artist with decades of experience, discipline, and precision honed beyond anything Damon had ever faced. The champion swallowed hard, tasting defeat before the fight was even close to over. In that moment, in that silent, terrible moment, Damon Cruz finally understood. He was completely outclassed. Damon staggered back toward the center of the cage, chest rising and falling like a man drowning on dry land. Sweat dripped down his face, his arms felt heavy, and every instinct in his fighter's soul screamed the same terrible truth. He was losing a battle he didn't understand. His voice came out broken, barely a whisper over the roar of the crowd. Why can't I hit you?" Chuck didn't pounce on him. Didn't exploit the weakness. Didn't mock him. Instead, he walked forward with quiet purpose, placing a steady hand on Damon's upper arm. Not as an opponent. As a guide. He gently helped Damon stand upright, as if resetting him. "Because," Chuck said, his tone calm and anchored, "you were fighting to humiliate." He lifted Damon's chin with 2 fingers, making sure the younger fighter looked him in the eyes. "I'm fighting," he continued, "to remind you of respect." The words landed harder than any punch Damon had taken in his entire career. The crowd watched in stunned silence. They expected brutality, domination, violence. Instead, they witnessed something entirely different. Discipline, control, a lesson disguised as a fight. Damon blinked rapidly, trying to focus, trying to process. Everything Chuck said echoed inside him, shaking loose the arrogance he had clung to for years. Before he could respond, the bell rang, a sharp, merciful break in the tension. End of round 1. Damon stumbled toward his corner, legs trembling. His coaches rushed to him, shouting advice, barking orders, trying to reignite the monster they believed was still inside him. "Pressure him. Stop backing up. Hit him harder. You're letting him embarrass you." But Damon didn't hear any of it. All he could hear was the truth ringing through his mind. He had not landed a single strike. Not one. Not even a touch. He sat on the stool, elbows on his knees, staring at the canvas beneath his feet. His gloves trembled slightly. Sweat dripped off his chin and hit the mat with quiet taps that somehow felt louder than the crowd. For the first time, the champion felt small. His coach slapped his shoulder. "Come on, man. You're the Titan. Get angry. Smash him." But Damon didn't lift his head. He whispered, broken, "I'm not fighting him, he's teaching me." Across the cage, Chuck didn't sit. He stood, hands at his sides, breathing slowly, composed, steady, untouched. Not a single bruise. Not a mark. Not even a heavy breath. The picture of absolute control. The referee called fighters to the center for the next round. Damon rose slowly, not with swagger, not with pride, but with humility forced upon him. As they met again in the middle of the cage, The noise of the arena faded into a distant hum. Damon swallowed, eyes softer, voice quiet. I'm sorry, he said, his shoulders sinking. I shouldn't have disrespected you. Chuck's expression warmed slightly, not victorious, not smug, just understanding. Good, he said softly. Recognizing it is the first step. Damon lowered his gaze, shaken to his core. He wasn't a champion in this moment. He wasn't even a fighter. He was a student. Chuck leaned closer, his voice carrying wisdom rather than wrath. Humility makes a real champion, he said. The words sank deep, into Damon's pride, into his doubt, into the part of him that still wanted to be better, not just stronger. Then Chuck stepped back, raising his hands to resume the stance. No malice. No gloating. Just readiness. Damon nodded once, respectfully, almost reverently, as if accepting a mentor's instruction. And in that tiny, unspoken moment between them, everything shifted. The crowd saw it. The commentators felt it. Even Damon's coaches fell silent. The fight was no longer a spectacle. It was a lesson. A transformation. A reckoning. Damon inhaled deeply, lowering his fists slightly, not out of fear, but out of respect. For the first time in his entire career, he entered a round not to dominate, but to learn. Chuck nodded approvingly, and the arena held its breath, waiting for what would come next. For a moment, the arena remained frozen in silence, the kind of silence that comes not from shock, but from reverence. The audience wasn't staring at two fighters. They were witnessing something far rarer in the world of combat sports. Growth. Humility. Transformation. Then the silence broke. It started with a single clap. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire stadium rose to its feet in a thunderous standing ovation. Not for the knockout they expected. Not for the carnage they paid to see. But for the lesson that unfolded before their eyes. A lesson delivered through discipline instead of destruction. Damon, breathing hard but steady now, looked around in disbelief. These people had come to see him dominate, to see Chuck demolished, to witness a cocky champion cement his legacy. Instead, they were applauding the very thing he had tried to dismiss. Respect. Honor. Character. His chest tightened, not from exhaustion, but from humility washing over him like a wave. The referee stepped between the two fighters, ready to declare the result. But Damon lifted a hand. No, he said quietly. He wasn't out of breath. He wasn't hurt. He was changed. Damon turned toward Chuck, took a slow breath, and then, in front of thousands of fans and millions watching live, he reached for Chuck's wrist and raised the legend's hand himself. The arena erupted. Cameras flashed like lightning. Commentators shouted over each other, stunned by the moment. And reporters swarmed the cage edges, microphones raised, eager to capture every word. Damon didn't wait for them to ask questions. He stepped forward, kept Chuck's hand raised, and spoke into the nearest mic with a voice that carried the weight of a man who had finally seen the truth. I challenged a legend with arrogance, he said, his tone raw but steady. He answered with dignity. The crowd roared in approval. Damon swallowed, glancing at Chuck, who stood calm, centered, and completely unbothered by the noise. I learned today, Damon continued, that respect hits harder than any punch. Even the commentators fell silent. Even Damon's rowdy corner men nodded slowly. Even the fans who once booed Chuck now cheered his name. Chuck gave the slightest nod, the kind that carried decades of wisdom, years of discipline, and a lifetime of understanding. He didn't take the mic. He didn't grandstand. He didn't shout. He simply lowered his hand, placed a palm briefly on Damon's shoulder, a gesture of acknowledgement, not superiority, and then turned toward the exit. No victory dance. No interview. No gloating. Chuck walked away the same way he fought. Calm. Collected. Timeless. The crowd parted for him as he left the cage, some reaching out to touch his glove, others bowing their heads respectfully. He acknowledged them with a simple nod, nothing more. Because real strength doesn't need noise. Real strength doesn't need the spotlight. Real strength teaches. Outside the cage, Damon remained still for a long moment, absorbing everything. Reporters kept shouting his name, asking for more comments, wanting drama, but Damon lifted a hand politely, signaling them to stop. "I think the lesson speaks for itself," he said softly. And it did. The cameras zoomed in as he looked at the mat beneath his feet, the same mat he had once strutted across with arrogance. Now it felt different. It felt like a place where he had shed ego and gained perspective. Slowly, he walked toward his corner. The same corner where coaches had shouted, demanded, pressured. But this time, none of them said a word. They watched him with newfound respect. One coach finally asked, "You okay?" Damon nodded. "I'm better than okay. I'm corrected." The crowd's cheers still echoed through the arena as the broadcast cut to its final shots. Damon standing humbled, Chuck walking away like a quiet storm, fans applauding the rare moment where a fight became something more. A message appeared on the screen. In a world full of noise, choose the strength that speaks quietly. Fade out. End.